Sana, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm
It's good to
good.
see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. It's been a long time that we are rescheduling this, but I'm really hopeful and I'm really glad that we actually met.
Yeah, no, happy to do this. Excited to chat with you and for the fruitful conversation.
Awesome, awesome. So before we dive into like the serious conversation or the conversation that we will be covering in depth, I would love to hear about your journey. How did you get into the design and stuff like that? So over to you.
Yeah, so I don't have a traditional route into design, which hopefully, gives a lot of hope to a lot of folks coming into the industry. But I originally was an architecture student, and I always grew up very creative, and I really thought that that would be the journey that I would take in life. And I got into this program in Chicago. It was 100 students, and I remember building a lot of different models and realizing, quickly that it just wasn't the right place for me. Critiques were really tough. I also don't think I had anyone around me that was very successful in the architecture field. Again, not to say that it didn't exist, just more so around my circle of family and friends that to kind of push me through that. And so I ended up leaving architecture school and I ended up going to be a finance major because I was always really good with numbers, which is really completely the opposite if you think about it from architecture to finance. And then I ended up doing really well and graduated with my finance degree from DePaul University. I remember, I was tutoring for statistics and calculus, and then right after I graduated, I moved to San Francisco and I started working at NASDAQ. And I was there for 2 years. And then I went to Thomson Reuters, which I was there for another 2 years. Um, and I was doing great, but just kind of looking around, and I felt like there was just a discrepancy between like me and the folks that were in the field. I've always felt like there was all these creative hobbies of mine that I was pursuing, like styling and photography and all of these things that I just felt like we didn't connect. And there was always this regret of leaving the architecture world. And so what I ended up doing at the time was I found UC Berkeley program that was teaching UX design. And I didn't know much about it. And I took one class, and I think the first class was like UX design process. And this was back in, I think, 2016. So for some time now. And I remember the professor making a joke about, oh, architecture is the gateway drug to UX design. And I always had this regret of leaving. So at the time, I was like, oh, I knew that this was kind of the right journey. And so that kind of started my UX design journey. And I started doing that while I was actually working in finance. I think at the time I was at NASDAQ, and then I was taking part-time classes. And in the beginning, like the confidence wasn't there. But as I learned more and built that up, that's when I started to build my confidence. And then officially during my time at Thomson Reuters, I started to do work for UX, and then officially kind of transitioned over as a UX designer. And so, I'm a lead UX designer today at Amazon. I'm a professor of, design at New York University. And that kind of transitioned me throughout this whole journey, as you can see. But it wasn't the journey that people think that it should be. But I actually think it makes me such a strong designer, being that I didn't come from the traditional route at all. So.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. And the thing that excites me more is when did you decide to, start teaching like professionally? Because you mentioned that you've been giving tuitions to the students, but in the finance. So when did you decide to, actually start in the parallel the educating journey?
Yeah, so kind of going back to what I mentioned. So back in like 2016 is when I started my journey into UX. I did a certificate program through UC Berkeley, which taught me UX design. And so I took, I think, about 7 to 8 classes. I learned UX design, user research, information architecture, wireframing and diagramming, HTML, CSS, which I don't know if you need to learn that one. And then I built like my portfolio. And so essentially after my Thomson Reuters job, which I was starting to do UX and, account management, that's when I fully transitioned over. So since then I worked at First Republic Bank, Afterpay, and then I've been at Amazon for 5+ years now. But yeah, like I would say like it was a slow transition. And I think I leveraged my current company to help support me with that transition because I was able to like work with, the design team and kind of slowly build up my project base while I was kind of learning in school on the side. So I would say like the transition took me about almost like year and a half, which I think it was okay because again, I don't have that traditional background in design. Today I have my master's from NYU, completely different today, but back then, if you looked at my resume on paper, I was a finance major that worked at finance companies and nothing really to do with design. Hobbies on the side. I'm a founder of my own jewelry business, and I did styling and photography. But again, it wasn't that I was doing that, as my day job. So I think for everyone kind of moving into this industry for UX design, I think it's okay. Take your time, give yourself grace, and learn it as you go. And I think that really, really helps out. So.
Cool. And even at that stage, because you have been around the decade in the design, and you've been now, it's been a long time that you have been also educating people. So how do you find the right balance? Because keeping a full-time job, educating, plus learning out your skills as well, coping up with the industry, and even giving it back to the community. So it takes a lot. And how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think for me, like I love just doing creative work. And so I think all things for me are very naturally blended in together and around the team. And that's where I ended up finding my partner, Talbot. That jewelry business has been published in a lot of different magazines like Vogue and Elle and Harper Bazaar. We've had lots of pop-ups in New York City. And so it was interesting because Afterpay, if you look at their business model, it's a payments company within the e-commerce space. Today at Amazon, I'm on a similar team, which we're now providing fulfillment services to a lot of merchants and businesses. And me being a merchant, like my brand, Sood, is kind of like very much connected. And so that's what I wanted to share is that I didn't plan it. It just ended up working out that everything ended up connecting really well. And I think as creatives, like, do what you love, and I don't think it'll feel like, oh, I'm overworking or anything like that, because everything will be like exciting and creative for you. So I think that's one thing where it feels not a job, it feels like very much my passion. Today being a professor and I do a lot of speaking engagements, like I really enjoy it. I enjoy giving back to the community because I think the community has given me so much. So I think I do the things that keep me very much, they don't feel like jobs and they feel like impactful and exciting to me. And I think that helps me really balance everything. And I also think like there's like a time and a place. Like when I first started, I was focusing so much on my craft of like, I really need to know how to design because I was so new to it. Today, like I have that down. So now I'm building other like areas that I feel like I really need to work on. So, like public speaking, or even just like I said, like mentoring others and really building that craft. So I think for me, it's been like, as I've grown, those areas of what I want to focus on has changed too. So I think another advice to folks out there is like, try not to like work on everything, like try to focus and have like hey, especially when you're new to design, like focus on the process, focus on the design skills. And as you do that, then you can start to add these other elements, which are also very important. So I think I'm in a different place right now, focusing on different things, but I think I'm constantly prioritizing like what do I need to focus. And that's like, as I moved up in the journey, which has helped me with my balance.
Cool, cool. And again, starting from your journey, you have been acing the design first, and then you were starting off experimenting with other stuff as well that eventually started working out for you. But what I'm currently curious about, like, how does your day to day design process, or maybe the problems that you face in the design, how do you solve them? What is your approach? Or maybe a workflow, if you can like put a spotlight on, that would be awesome.
Yeah, great question. So I think one thing to touch on is day to day is very different depending on what company you work for. As you know, like I work for a really big company today, which is Amazon. But in the past, I've also worked at startups and I've also worked at like medium-sized companies. And I think something designers need to know is different sized companies will have different types of processes for your day to day. The definition of UX will also be different on if you're also incorporating like UI or if you're not. So I think these are things that really make a difference on your day to day. Another thing that also makes a really difference on day to day is your leveling. Like, are you a junior designer or are you someone who's more senior? Today, I'm like a lead designer, so I manage a team of designers. And so my work usually is split between like doing IC work along with doing managerial work. And so again, it's a little bit different. But again, if you're focusing on just IC and if you're junior, you're going to be focused very much on like the execution and the design. Now, to give you an example of what I do, I would say today I manage maybe anywhere from like 2 to 3 projects. It really depends. And they're constantly like happening. And I think they could be at different phases. And so a lot of the times, like if I were to like give you a percentage, maybe I would say like 20% design. I would say there's a lot more strategy involved. So maybe like 30% strategy. And then a lot of it is also just like finding, making sure that like your stakeholders are aligned with that. So a lot of it is like communication and just stakeholder alignment. And so that's probably like a good amount of it. And then, like I said, for me, like I'm doing managerial duties. So that involves like, one-on-ones, critiques, processes for the team, processes around our AI, interviewing. And so that's a little bit different. So I do want to bring that in for that element. But I would say like, for day to day, it really, really depends on like the level, on the company, on the definition of design. Do you have researchers involved? Like there's a lot of different elements and factors. And I've kind of actually like worked at all different types of companies where I've seen the difference between that, because I've worked at companies where, like First Republic Bank, they didn't focus too much on like user research. It was all around like quantitative data. So they had app data that they would use to design. Versus like, companies at Amazon, like we're very forward on like user research and making sure we're validating our data or our designs before we ship. So been kind of a mixture.
Cool. I'll come to the stakeholder management in a bit, but before that, I wanted to like ask, that is out of again curiosity, and that is, since you've been working with different stages of companies, right? It was a startup, the mid-sized company is now probably one of the biggest companies on the planet. So in all those companies, you've been into the managerial role as well. You have been to the execution side as well at the start of your journey. So one thing that I wanted to ask is like, how do you trust your team members? Because as the time passes and you come to more and more senior positions, right? So when it comes to the delegation, but even before that, you need to have that trust or the same energies, that if I'm going to like automate my tasks a bit, but if I'm going to like dedicate my tasks, so is he or she gonna come up with a solution right on time, because deadlines are very crucial at any company, right? So working individually and then being a manager of certain teams, how can you trust and how can you manage that? Because I've been struggling a lot with this, and I'm sure like there are a lot of managers that are struggling with this kind of problem as well. So how do you proceed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, if you look at Amazon, first of all, we do everything around leadership principles, which are you familiar with? We have like 11 of them. There's like customer obsession, buys for action, think big, deliver results, and one of them is earns trust. And that one, it's interesting because I've actually been very strong with that. And it's interesting because I think it comes from my previous background of being in finance and sales. And I think with the trust element, like a big piece of it is, are you communicating with your teams and your manager in the appropriate time that you need to, right? So let's say you finish something, do you communicate it? If you don't finish it and if you run into an issue, do you escalate it in time? Do you pull in the people that you need to? Are you asking the right questions? Are you setting up the meetings to do the reviews that needs to be done? So I think a lot of the trust for me comes from the proactiveness of right? I think it's okay if you don't know something, and it's okay if you run into problems, because that's not what I look at when I'm like managing my team. I'm not like, oh, they didn't know how to handle this. It's more of, are they just communicating when they need what they need? And then are they then able to get to like that, timeline? And it's okay if not all timelines are met, because I also understand sometimes if there's a shift in priorities, or if the scope got bigger, or if things happen that they're just communicating that we need to change the timeline. So I actually think trust for me in environments, and I think honestly in any relationship, right? Like trust is like built through communication. So I think that's the biggest piece for me. Yeah.
Cool. And of course, making strategies and trusting your team members is something that comes with the practice, and of course, it is an experience and a skill to master. But another skill that designers are actually struggling, like me, because most of the designers are introverts, right, and they struggle a lot in presentation when they are even presenting probably their skills or giving demos. So they struggle a lot in that end. So how do you manage, or do you think that the stakeholder management comes into play? That how can maybe tips or tricks that worked for you can be helpful for like them. So what kind of things that worked out for you when it comes to the stakeholder management? What were they expecting from you, and how did you deliver, or like mastered that skill as well? So if you can like put some light on that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think stakeholder management can be very tricky sometimes. And I think actually at Amazon, a lot of the projects involve this element. And I actually think junior designers, it's really hard for them sometimes to manage stakeholders. And I think there's a couple things that I can share. First and foremost, I think it's important to understand the ecosystem of how product, design, and engineering work together and what each element are caring about and looking at, right? Engineering is caring about feasibility of how they can develop something. Is it feasible or not, right? Product is caring about how can we make money or profit for the business and what are the profit like wants from this. And design is caring about the user. Now, if you understand how those elements work, because then you can speak to those partners in a way that they will understand. Just like you will do UX on, your problem, I would almost do UX on like who your stakeholders are to understand like what are they thinking. It's the same thing of like running user research. And so that's the first element. And then I think the second element is, again, that communication piece that we just talked about, like communicating. Like I would say, like if you're coming onto a project, being very like communicative around like what is your processes going to be, how are you, like what are your timelines. I think also working with partners, asking for what their timelines are and working backwards from that. Like, is there a timeline that they're trying to meet? And then so that way you can kind of work backwards from that timeline. And then I would say like a big piece of it is, I would say like if you are newer to design, I would leverage your own design team to kind of share the work before you go to partners. Like I would kind of have like a gut check with like internal designers to make sure like, hey, I have these designs. I'm going to share them with my stakeholders. Can I get them reviewed? And so having good processes in place where you're reviewing with your team, your manager, etc., and then you kind of can present the best foot forward. I think with partners, it's also very important to be very data driven. So if you're showing them, let's say 3 different designs and you're like, I recommend this one. I want to know the pros and cons, the risks. I want to know the data associated to it and why. That will then allow you to speak to them in the language they want you to speak to them, rather than you being like, hey, I think this, and you're not really sure. So again, having very strong reasons around your why. Like, why are you designing this? You designed 10 different designs. Why do you think this particular one is the best one for our project, So I think, again, being super data driven, being communicative, and then again, understanding like how the 3 fit together, so then you can best speak to them in the way that you want, in the way that they would understand you.
Cool. Cool. So, coming off from a point where you have asked about, probably mentioned more about, the communication and stakeholder management. So, this is all, I think, the part of your workflow. I just wanted to understand, like, where do you put AI inside it? Because there are, again, two school of thoughts. I'm not going to the like proper extremes, but there are two school of thoughts. One of them is integrating everything within their process, even if that's not needed to. Just again cope up with the industry, and the others are that they go to AI, but they don't rely on that, right? So I just wanted to know, like, where do you stand, and how do you integrate the AI workflows within your workflow?
Okay, so I think I have a very bearish view on it. And so the reason is that I think we need to use AI in all of our tasks if possible. Like if you can speed up your tasks, you should use AI, in my opinion. But it's with a caveat. And that caveat is if you don't understand the foundations and you don't know design, then it's really risky to use AI because you don't know what you don't know. You know, like you don't know how good the AI outputs are, how to edit it, how to prompt it, how to work with it. And so I think if you're new to design, learn the foundations and really, really be good at it before you start inserting in the AI tools. But I do think AI tools need to be used in every single one of your tasks. Because today, like if you look at the market, you know, there's jobs being cut because of AI, and there's a lot of like emphasis on roles becoming larger because we now have AI to help us. So I think every single person should be using AI, but you need to make sure you know what to look for and how to edit it and how to prompt it and how to work with it. I think everyone should be tool agnostic. I don't think we should be caught up on what tools to use. There's so many, right? If you just look at the prototyping vibe coding tools, you have Builder.io, you have Vercel, you have Replit, you have Bubble.io. Like there's so many out there. Figma Make, right? And so I don't think you should focus on one particular tool. I think because, you know, when you join a company, you could have permissioning towards one or you can't work on one. So I think people need to be tool agnostic. They need to understand how the tools work, but I think they need to learn the foundations. And I think they need to also have really good guidelines in place of how they're reviewing their work with AI and what are their maybe overall tenets or guidelines on if they are working with AI that they're going to make sure that they keep in mind, right? So almost like doing checks with their work. And then also just like overall, like, okay, having a strategy of when you want to use it and why. So I think, again, I would use it and I would learn it, but I would just be very cautious of making sure you have good thinking when you're using it and you have the foundations down.
Cool. It's just that I wanted to ask that you had, again, in your workflows, in your current responsibilities, there are a lot of things that you've been doing, right? Execution at somewhat, at an extent, then there was strategy management, then there was, stakeholder management, then there is probably recruiting for your team and, or just doing a lot in your workflows. So where does, AI helps the most when it comes to your workflow?
Yeah, there's need to also think of the copy. Use AI when it conforms with copyright. The copys. So after you've run a research study to help with synthesis and writing documents. I also use AI for secondary research. So if you're like trying to understand like what are the patterns for search bars, like help me do the secondary research or competitive analysis, market research. I use it heavily for that. And then, I would say like today for the design piece, I use it heavily for like prototyping and coming up with like new ideas. And so I think a good kind of exercise for folks to do is break down your tasks. And this doesn't even have to be for UX, like any task, right? Whatever you are, whatever your job role is, look at your tasks and look at each one of them and see, are there tools, AI tools that are out there that could help you expedite that? Then if so, start practicing with it. Because like I said, like our industry is now expecting more and more from us. So I think folks coming into this industry today will need to just be able to work even more efficiently than they used to because their scopes are going to be wider. And so the quicker you can incorporate AI into your processes, the better. But again, with a caveat of remembering the foundations and remembering how to review and remembering how to prompt and knowing like the downfalls of AI, right? AI can hallucinate. If AI doesn't have, if it's not, if the training hasn't been there for a certain date or time period or data, it may say no and it may be inaccurate. So doing fact checking, keeping in mind the hallucinations. And so again, those are all the things that will help you with it. So, but yeah, I would say like research, copywriting, design are definitely, and then just day to day, right? Emails, responding to emails. Like, I think there's everything that can be in a way like automated today. So
Makes sense. Makes sense. So we are now at a point where we will start concluding our conversation, just wrapping up. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to know that keeping your design journey, your design experience, your educating experience, and because you have been into mentoring a lot, right? So if you can give, a piece of advice for people who are looking out for work, or people who are just getting into design, if you have, a piece of advice for them, what would that be?
Yeah, I think kind of building off of what I said earlier, like give yourself grace on like learning and give yourself time, like UX is pretty complicated and I think sometimes if people think like, "Oh, I'll learn it in 3 months." It's not really the case. Like there's so many different parts of it and each part is like you can dive heavily into research for months and months and months. You can dive heavily into the design for a long time. So I would say the first like advice is like give yourself grace and give yourself time, right? Because it will take some time to learn and digest and really make it second nature. The second advice I would give to you is UX is not very linear. Like the process is like, if you think about it, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test. People think it's going to follow that. It's not the case. Every company's processes are very different, and the process that you want to do will be changing. And so be very flexible with your design process. And I think that takes time to understand. I think it also takes time to like be confident in like which piece of the process should I be doing. Like understanding that like maybe personas aren't really done that much in industry, but they are done in school a lot. So again, like understanding like the differences of maybe what you're learning in school versus what you're learning in the real world. I would also say like another advice is like soft skills are super, super important. Like I said, like the big pieces of like design are like the stakeholder management or even just, communicating your designs to stakeholders. Like all of those things require a lot of just like really good soft skills on like how are you defending your designs? How are you presenting your designs? How do you storytell? And those pieces, I would say, like, are the key to pushing your designs forward. And that's a huge element. I think sometimes designers focus so much on like the designing and the hard skills, and they're so, so good at that. But then they miss the piece of like, well, how do I now like make it very beautiful and tie a bow on it and share it? And so I can get the buy-in from it for those features. And so I think that's another piece. And I think the last piece is just like, be yourself, like be confident. Like I think confidence is a big key of it. Like whatever it is, like just like provide thought behind like why you're doing what you're doing. And I think just bring in your personality. Like when I see portfolios and things like that, I don't want a very basic portfolio. I want to see the person's personality come across. And I think the last piece is like, if you have like a unique background, share it, like bring that across. Like I'm someone who like doesn't come from a design background, was design, then went to like, finance and kind of all over. Like my journey does not make sense, but it actually makes me a stronger designer. And it makes me bring in different skills to the team that the other team members may not have. So I think just keeping in mind like your uniqueness of like your background is actually going to make you a better designer, in my opinion. So celebrate that and show that and be confident with it. So.
That's cool. So with that, I think that's it from my side. If you have anything to ask, feel free to.
No, this is awesome. Thank you so much. You were mentioning that you've done 29 of these.
Yeah.
And so what got you started on this podcast journey?
Yeah. So again, sorry, I didn't get that. Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say you said you mentioned you've done 29 podcasts so far. So what got you started on this journey?
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. So again, I've been asked this multiple times, and like the point is, so I have a goal, and everything else is tied up to that, right? So the goal is actually to help 1 billion people, right? And that's like my ultimate goal, right? So I tried to do the design work. It went off great. Then I wrote a book. It's live. I think it should be here, back in here.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's because of like few my routine. It's not the payment gateway issues. I need to integrate them. That is something that I need to do. And then I explored one more medium, and that is that podcast, right? With minimum setup. And the reason for that is, so one of my attribute is I love talking to new people, right? And because these random conversations actually help me or stay with me longer than any other video course or something that I would probably read on the internet, right? When it comes to design, or when it comes to the experiences, understanding the experiences, right? So if I read it somewhere, I actually study it in a course. I watch a YouTube video that will be probably gone in like few minutes. I won't remember it
Yeah.
unless I will be like implementing it somewhere. I'll then come back to it, refresh my memory, and then probably will start implementing on it. But when I learn
Oh,
stuff from like conversations, it will stay longer with me. And if I document it and put it on the YouTube, I don't know when it will really explode. Even if it's not, the one person, it could be anyone. If it's being affected by 1% of this podcast or any other conversation that I am doing currently, if they are being affected, if they know something, even 1% understand something from these conversations, that's a win-win for me. So I started documenting that. So it's just that me having conversations with a variety and diverse designers, so that I learn from their experience. It will stay with me. Plus, if I document it and put it on any of the streaming platforms, maybe people who will watch this can have some value, and they can learn, or they can probably do anything with this. But it will not like stop at one point. It will just keep growing. So that was the idea of the podcast, and bringing people on board and talking with them, have fun, get to know them, get to know about their experiences. So that was just the goal. So yeah.
yeah, no, that's awesome. I think that's very similar for me too. Like the reason for why I teach is to make a difference and is to help. Like I got a lot of mentorship and help, and I wouldn't be here today without the support of others. And so, like, how do you continue to pay it forward and do good? And so I think that's a huge part of why I mentor, a huge part of why I teach. And I truly enjoy teaching because when I see my students get the jobs that they want or succeed in the way that they want, it feels really good because I think it feels more impactful for me than me actually doing the design work. And so I love that you're like that goal of like hitting 1 billion people. Like that's amazing. And that's yeah, that's I feel like that's gonna stick with me for sure. So that's
Awesome.
awesome.
Awesome. That's cool. Thank you, Sana, for showing up.